The bells rang when no one pulled the rope. That's how it always starts, in natural sounds echoing through stone, vibrating through the marrow of anyone still awake to hear. But in Ashworth, England, 1965, it didn't stop with bells. They don't want you to know what happened to the Higgins family. Not the police, not the church, not even the historians who pretend to chase truth while guarding the gate. Because what happened that autumn wasn't just a disappearance, it was a reawakening, a breach, a door long shut, opened again for people gone, a father, mother, and 2 children. No struggle, no witnesses. One night, the cottage windows glowed with candlelight. The next morning, silence, their meals untouched. The bed still warm, no footprints, no signs of escape. The door locked from the inside. 3 months later, investigators found a sealed chamber beneath the village church, hidden behind stones blackened by centuries, and inside, the Higgins clothes, the children's notebooks, and journals written in a hand that matched Eleanor Higgins 2 weeks after they were supposed to be dead. What's buried beneath English soil isn't just history, it's power. The kind of power that shaped empires, built cathedrals, and whispered into the ears of monarchs while the masses prayed blindly above. The Church of England tried to ban what was found beneath St. Mary's in Ashworth, but bans don't kill belief. They only drive it underground. This isn't folklore. This is a fracture in reality, a crack where old rituals survive behind polished sermons and polite Christian hymns, a space where ancient voices still speak, but only to those who remember the proper observances. You were never meant to hear this. That's not drama. That's fact. For 60 years, what truly happened in that village has been hidden behind layers of obfuscation, polite records, bureaucratic silence, and sealed archives. But tonight, the seal breaks. You're not just hearing a story, you're stepping into a chamber that was buried for centuries, a place where rituals older than scripture were practiced by families chosen not for piety, but for blood. And once you enter, you don't leave unchanged. Let the others scroll past. Let them watch cat videos and motivational fluff. This one's for the man who knows something's wrong with the world and wants to see what's been kept from him. Welcome to Ashworth, the village where belief never died. Ashworth wasn't just isolated. It was preserved like a specimen sealed in amber, nestled in the folds of the Yorkshire Dales. The village was a perfect stage for what unfolded in 1965. But to understand what happened to the Higgins family, you need to understand what Ashworth really was. Not a place, but a design. Generations lived and died there under one watchful eye. The church, St. Mary's, towered above the village like a sentinel, built on the ruins of a Saxon chapel, which itself sat atop something even older, something never documented in Christian history. The church's foundation stones were carved with markings that didn't match any known religious tradition, symbols that predate even Druidic scripts. And yet, not one vicar ever dared to erase them. They told the villagers the church was holy. But Eleanor Higgins, she read deeper. She studied the stones, the herbs, the festivals no one celebrated publicly anymore, but that some still practiced in basements. And by firelight, the mothers and grandmothers whispered things to her in the market, told names, old songs, and behind her smile, something awakened. Not possession, not madness, but memory. She was remembering something, or perhaps something was remembering her. Her husband, Thomas, began to notice the way she moved differently, the symbol she drew absent-mindedly into flour on the kitchen table, the way the children, especially little Billy, was stared along at the church almost like they were listening to it. Then came the drawings. Billy stopped drawing the countryside and started sketching shaped circles, thorns, spirals, and figures in robes surrounding something he never named. He called it the breathing stone. Margaret began quoting texts she couldn't have read, phrases that didn't appear in any book the school teacher could trace. When asked about it, she'd smile faintly and say, "We're not supposed to talk yet, not until the veil thins." The veil. That's the word that kept surfacing in Eleanor's journal, found beneath the church floor. The veil is almost gone. She wrote, Ashworth remembers. The blood is ready. The gate can open again. What gate? No one in officialdom ever explained. They sealed the chamber and silenced the constable who first found it. He retired mysteriously 6 months later and refused interviews until his death. But the phrase scratched into the back wall of the chamber, deep, deliberate, done by hand, was this: They sleep beneath the altar. They wait for the song. We'll talk about that song soon. But first ask yourself, how many other villages were designed like Ashworth? The deeper you dig into Ashworth, the more the lines blur between religion and something far older. Something that wore religion like a mask. They called themselves the Ashworth Historical Preservation Society. On the surface, it was harmless, a gathering of intellectuals and folklorists led by Reverend Harold Whitmore. But beneath the polished explanations and tea-time lectures, they were reactivating something ancient. Not studying, reviving. Reverend Whitmore wasn't just a man of the cloth. His study was filled not with sermons, but with grimoires, herbalists, scrolls, and ritual codices written in pre-Reformation Latin. One witness whose identity were protecting claims that Whitmore often spoke of reversing the fracture, a phrase none of his sermons ever included, but that showed up repeatedly in Eleanor Higgins' journals. By 1964, Eleanor wasn't just attending meetings, she was leading rituals. She introduced what she called family bindings, rituals meant to draw spiritual protection around bloodlines, reenacted from obscure rural practices outlawed by the Anglican Church centuries earlier. Well, it wasn't protection she was invoking, it was invitation, a circle of 13 participants, white candles, salt lines, recitations of names not found in any Christian scripture, and in the center, a child eyes closed, speaking phrases in a language no one could identify. Billy. The group justified it all in the name of experiential history, while something crossed over in October 1965. Multiple sources describe one ritual never officially documented held. On the night of a lunar eclipse, deep in the subchamber beneath St. Mary's, the same hidden chamber later sealed by investigators, witnesses claimed the temperature dropped more than 20 degrees inside the stone walls. Candles flickered against wind that came from no window, and when Eleanor sang, the walls responded, literally, vibrating in resonance. That's when the parish records ended. No mention of the meeting, no church logs, just silence. And then the Higgins family was gone. No signs of travel, no money withdrawn, no farewell letters, just a locked cottage and whispers in the village. But one item remained on Eleanor's writing desk, a single page, unsigned, unstained, and left as if she had just stepped out. We have gone where the old blood goes. Do not mourn. Do not follow. The gate has opened, and it remembers. This wasn't disappearance. It was a return. The question is to what? They said it was a disappearance, that the Higgins family simply left. But that's the language of those who still believe the world is ordered, explainable, safe. In truth, the Higginses crossed over, and they were not the first. When police finally accessed archived church records in 1985, under public pressure they never anticipated, they found something chilling. This wasn't the first family to vanish in Ashworth, not by decades. In 1891, the Crawfords disappeared from a cottage 3 streets over from the Higgins home. No sign of struggle, no explanation. The parish records simply read, "Return to the fold." No one ever found the children. In 1743, a woman named Hester Whitlock and her 2 sons vanished on All Hallows Eve. Her cottage was found immaculately clean. On her kitchen table, 3 bowls of milk, untouched. An archaic gesture offering or invitation. And before even that, in a Saxon manuscript buried under centuries of revisions and corrections, one entry remains unaltered. 3 lads left the veil under shadow. One bore the mark, till we're chosen. They will rise again at the ringing of the 3rd tone. Do you see the pattern? Ashworth doesn't lose people, it absorbs them. What we're dealing with here is not a cult, not mere folklore. It's a survival system and ancient mechanism buried inside the village itself. Something that feeds on memory, ritual, bloodline, and silence. That's why the church, by November 1965, the fog that haunted Ashworth wasn't just meteorological, it was psychic. The villagers stopped speaking of the Higgins family. Children were told not to ask. Adults crossed the street when passing their cottage, but denial is a weak mask when something ancient is breathing beneath your feet. At St. Mary's Church began to change. The bells rang in irregular hours, always in 3s. Witnesses claimed to hear whispers inside the sanctuary during morning prayer, not voices, but murmurings layered, untranslatable, as though multiple. Tongues were speaking beneath the hymns. The priest, Reverend Whitmore, offered no explanations. He simply smiled and said, Not all worship is done in daylight. A parishioner, John Martell, claimed he saw Eleanor Higgins walking near the church after her disappearance. Not ghostly, alive, a lantern in one hand, a bundle in the other, her face serene. When he followed her, she vanished between two yew trees planted in the churchyard, a spot locals now avoid. Another villager, Edith Blackwell, reported seeing light from beneath the church during a midnight rainstorm, not from the tower, from below, as if something deep in the earth had ignited. Still, no one dared dig. When police reopened the Higgins home, they found a curious collection of items on the dining table, an ancient map of the Yorkshire, dales marked with symbols, 2 jars filled with anise and dried yarrow, and a letter that simply read, "He is waking. We were the key." What had the Higgins family awakened? It wasn't God. It wasn't the devil. It was older. In Eleanor's hidden journal, recovered from behind a loose stone in the chamber below the church, she references the one beneath, a being whose name is never written, only drawn. The sigil appears 23 times, always accompanied by the phrase, "We remember because we were chosen. The others forget because they weren't made to." This is the central theme. Some bloodlines are keepers, others vessels. Ashworths. Old families weren't elite because of status. They were selected, generationally conditioned to protect a system of power that predates organized religion. And Eleanor, she wasn't an outlier. She was a catalyst. She was the return. The Higgins disappearance wasn't a tragedy. It was a ritual, a completion, a sacrifice, or an ascension. You still think this is myth? Then ask yourself why the church sealed the records. Why no press coverage exists beyond one buried article in the Yorkshire Weekly? Why the exact architectural plans of St. Mary's have been scrubbed from every public registry? This isn't fiction. This is concealed design. And it's not over. The deeper you go, the clearer it becomes. Eleanor Higgins didn't vanish. She performed. We now have fragments of the ritual, the one that took place beneath St. Mary's Church in late October 1965. Source from Eleanor's personal writings, Reverend Whitmore's unpublished notes, and an anonymous letter sent to the Yorkshire Historical Review in 1983. It was never published. It began with 13 candles, salt lines, a circle drawn in ash and iron. But this wasn't theater. This wasn't romantic paganism. Every step was precise, purposeful, not to summon, but to awaken. The ritual was timed to the thinning of the veil, what the old bloodlines called the crossing. 3 nights surrounding the new moon. 3 offerings made in silence. 3 names spoken backwards. The final night, according to Eleanor's journal, was different. Billy stood in the center. Margaret held the chalice, and Eleanor sang. She called it the Song of Returning. No lyrics, no melody, just tone resonant and human, vibrating the stone walls until dust rained from the ceiling. Witnesses, what few remained willing to speak, described a moment during the final ritual when time itself bent. Clocks stopped, lights flickered. One participant blacked out and awoke an hour later, nose bleeding, unable to speak. The others said Eleanor had begun speaking in a language they didn't know, yet somehow understood, a language older than Latin, older than sound. Then, silence. No flash, no explosion, just an unnatural quiet, and then emptiness. The room was found 3 months later, cold, undisturbed. 13 candle stubs, iron dust, children's drawings pinned to the walls, depicting doorways and stars with too many points, and on the altar, a phrase carved by hand into the stone. The fold is mended, the gate is memory. He walks again. They sealed the chamber immediately, locked it behind 6 tons of limestone, and labeled it an unauthorized cellar. Reverend Whitmore was reassigned and died of heart failure 2 years later, clutching a book of pre-Christian hymns when they found him. But the others, they stayed in Ashworth, quiet, watching, because it had begun again. The pattern, the cycle, the blood memory. You think this was one ritual in one village? No, this was a spark, a reactivation of an ancient system buried across the British Isles and beyond. What Eleanor did was only the beginning. And if you're listening now, truly listening, you're part of the next phase. Ashworth wasn't the secret, it was the signal. Ashworth was never isolated, it was a node. And once you see that, the illusion shatters. Records show that St. Mary's Church, built in 1187, shares an identical floor plan with 12 other churches across England. all constructed within a 30-year window, all built at topsides labeled in early Saxon maps with a single rune, raid, not just journey. It means a path between realms. This was infrastructure, ancient, pre-Christian, hidden, in plain sight. The Higgins family didn't just perform a forgotten ritual. They reactivated a system of spiritual transmission line buried beneath Christian dogma and imperial history. These churches were never purely for worship. They were capstones, anchors, securing something beneath, and they're all still operational, the Anglican records, when forcibly unsealed in 1985, revealed a network of correspondence between clergy in York, Somerset, Durham, and Ashworth. The letters used phrases like singular convergence, veiled resonance, and most chilling, ensure that the family remains pure. This wasn't about faith. It was about preservation. Bloodlines were curated, not just in Ashworth, all across England. The Whitlocks, the Carrs, the Thorntons, families who intermarried for centuries, not for love, for continuity, for containment. They weren't just preserving history. They were feeding something. The rituals required children, not in the modern, horrific sense, but spiritually, children could still hear what adults forgot. They drew what they saw. They carried the frequencies, unfiltered. Billies drawing circles, thorns, stars with impossible angles. They matched diagrams found in Mesopotamian temple carvings. Not similar, identical. Having an 8-year-old in 1965 replicate symbols from 4,000 years ago, unless something was speaking through him. They called it the one beneath. Not a god, not a demon, an intelligence, old, patient, silent for centuries until Eleanor's voice stirred it. And here's what most won't dare say: the one beneath never left. It was never sealed. It was never banished. It was only forgotten until one village remembered, until one woman sang, until one child saw. Ask yourself how many disappearances across history were actually returns. How many rituals have been mislabeled as folklore? And how many modern churches still echo with sounds that didn't begin with Christ? Ashworth is a fragment, a symbol, but the system still hums beneath our cities, our traditions, our blood, and now you've heard the song too. You think the past stays buried, that time is a wall separating us from what came before? You've been lied to. The truth is this: institutions do not forget, they bury. And those who bury governments, churches, schools, secret societies, they never cover up myth, they only silence threat. After the Higgins family vanished, the Church of England classified the incident as ecclesiastical sensitive. That's a code, a firewall. It means what happened is no longer theological and strategic. The Vatican even sent a silent envoy in 1967, a Jesuit from the Archivum Secretum. No public record, no statement, just a visit, a sealed box carried into St. Mary's, and nothing spoken again, but someone leaked fragments. And what they revealed was damning. A subsection of church doctrine buried under centuries of revision refers to a class of ancient beings called the remnant choir, entities not demonic, not angelic, but residual intelligences, echoes with hunger, not physical, but psychic. They require resonance to awaken, chants, symbols, bloodline ritual, sound waves that match the old frequencies. The Higgins family hit the frequency. But why was it allowed? Because beneath every modern power structure there is one unspoken truth. Control requires containment. You don't control the present by managing money, media, or warfare. You control it by gatekeeping memory, and the Higgins event was a breach. That's why MI5 took over the investigation in '66. That's why all surviving members of the Ashworth Historical Preservation Society either vanished, died mysteriously, or were institutionalized within 10 years. Mrs. Margaret Thornton, the librarian, was last seen wandering the moors in 1972, barefoot and humming a melody no one could place. Dr. Carr was found in his surgery with every book burned, pages of scribbled symbols nailed to the ceiling. His final note: it's not the ritual that's dangerous, it's the remembering. And Whitmore, the reverend whose voice opened the gate, autopsy revealed vocal cord damage consistent with overuse at inhuman frequency. A man who sang something no human larynx was ever built to contain. They didn't just wake something, they made contact. You think this ended in Ashworth? You think it was contained? There are active sites right now, old churches with sealed basements, museums with artifacts kept out of public view, government buildings with blueprints that trace back to raid coordinates. Because the system didn't collapse, it expanded, and every time a name is erased, a record sealed, a ritual discredited as folklore. They aren't hiding madness, they're protecting access, and access is power. They don't need to erase history anymore, they just need you to doubt yourself. Because here's the final truth, the system isn't built to destroy memory, it's built to weaponize forgetting, and now, you're living inside that system. Every man watching this, every seeker drawn to forbidden knowledge, you are the target. Not because you're weak, but because you're dangerous. You carry the potential to remember, to feel what others refuse to see, and so they bury you. Beneath distractions, algorithms, medications, entertainment engineered not to entertain, but to sedate. Because if you remembered what was lost in Ashworth, you'd start asking the forbidden questions. Why do so many ancient churches share geometry with star maps? Why do secret societies from the Freemasons to the Jesuits to the intelligence community preserve rituals long after abandoning their stated purpose? Why do children still draw the same symbols Billy Higgins did even now? This isn't paranoia, it's design. In 1993, a classified document leaked from the British Ministry of Defense referenced subterranean harmonic zones beneath 12 sites in the UK. St. Mary's was one of them. It claimed that localized frequencies